A very warm welcome to everyone today. Thank you so much for joining us for this seminar. I'm Dominic Wyse, Professor Dominic Wyse, and I'm founding director of the Helen Hamlyn Centre for Pedagogy at the Institute of Education. And I'm particularly thrilled to be collaborating on the event today with my colleagues in the Primary PGCE at the IOE. And in particular, it's Tessa Wiley who's with us today, who inspired us on this focus and the topic. So we're bringing together inspiring speakers from a range of backgrounds. We're going to discuss how we might help children, how we might engage with children in the face of climate change. Big topic, arguably the most important topic facing humans today. And our speakers today include Lucy O'Rorke, Professor Douglas Bourne, and Dr. Anna Gunz. I'll just say a little bit about each one of them, and then I will hand over to Lucy to start us off with our presentations. So Lucy O'Rorke worked in theatre for 13 years, producing, designing, performing and teaching, before she joined the Helen Hamlyn Trust as Projects and Research Director at the start of 2004. Lucy was responsible for the development of the Trust's Open Futures Learning Programme, which we're going to hear about in just a moment. So thank you, Lucy, and everyone for joining us, and we're looking forward to that. Our Helen Hamlyn Centre for Pedagogy is very well aware and has enjoyed the Open Futures, learning about Open Futures programme, and we still work with some of the inspirational head teachers and teachers from that programme. Doug Bourne has served as the Director of the Development Education Research Centre at the IOE since 2006 and as Chair of the UK Committee on the Decade of Education for Sustainable Development from 2004 to 2009. He's been a member of a range of government advisory panels and working groups, including the Sustainable Development Education Panel from 1998 to 2005, and the Development Awareness Working Group from 1998 to 2004. And we're looking forward to hearing from Doug about Pedagogy of Hope. Anna Gunz is a paediatrician at the Children's Hospital London Health Services Centre in Ontario, Canada, and is an assistant professor of medicine and dentistry at Western University. Anna completed her medical degree in paediatric residency at McMaster University, and prior to this completed a degree in geography at the University of Toronto. Alongside her paediatric role, Anna is involved in advocacy and research in planetary health, including health monitoring of climate change and meaningful support for young people with eco-distress. And of course, to have such a distinguished international speaker is wonderful. So thank you so much for making it through the airwaves from far away. Anyway, a huge thanks to all our speakers and to you, our audience, for joining today. And without further ado, we're going to start with Lucy, then Doug, and then Anna to give their presentations. And after that, we will have about 15 minutes or so for questions from our audience. Lucy, over to you.
So thanks so much for inviting me to talk about Open Futures. You know who I am, and I was also formerly director of the Open Futures Trust. So I'm just going to begin with a bit of context for the time that we find ourselves in. And this was a survey which was carried out last year about climate anxiety. And I just pulled out a couple of headlines, as it were, which I found personally quite shocking. That 72% of young people aged 16 to 25 in the UK think the future is frightening. And sadly, 55.7% of all those surveyed think that humanity is doomed. So this is really what we are dealing with. The kinds of feelings that these young people are experiencing are the kind of feelings that they're carrying and they're becoming really overwhelmed by. And what makes it even worse is that these are also the kinds of feelings which are a catalyst for feelings of powerlessness and helplessness. And the context for everyone, not only in relation to the climate, I think we're all very aware, is extremely challenging. And part of the sort of contributing thing that makes it worse for me, I think, is that we get stuck in our heads, grappling with intrusive thoughts, feeling powerless, disconnected from our bodies, disconnected from our environment, and frankly, disconnected from ourselves and from each other. And I was talking with some young people last week, and one of them said to me, we're constantly told that we're the future, but nobody wants to listen to us. And I think this is, I mean, it's heartbreaking to hear a young person say that. I wanted to share this quote from Lady Chatterley's Lover because I think it really seemed to speak to the moment. And I'm going to read it out. Vitally, the human race is dying. It's like a great uprooted tree with its roots in the air. We must plant ourselves again in the universe. And for me, this is really about a need for reconnection, a need for agency, and a need for a sense of belonging. And what I like about this quote is the physicality of planting ourselves again, which is a very physical, tangible feeling. We need to respond with a curriculum that's fit for purpose and which provides for the needs of our young children. We know that learning outdoors has huge benefits, not only on children's well-being, but also academically. But how do you do it? What does it look like in action to ensure that you're leveraging all of the learning benefits that you can? Well, the Trust approached it through the Open Futures programme. And Open Futures is a whole school approach. It's a whole curriculum approach that brings together the pedagogy of inquiry-based learning through our Ask It strand and skills-based learning through Grow It, Cook It and Film It. And all of these are life-enhancing, healthy activities, none of which are currently part of the national curriculum. We're very grateful to our expert partners that we developed the programme with, and we work very closely with our curriculum team. And they too embraced inquiry once they'd been introduced to it as a very powerful pedagogy to support the skills work that the children were doing. We worked closely with the schools, and we also worked closely with David Leet's team, whose formative inputs really helped us to shape the programme as we went along. So I would say it was co-designed. And the Open Futures inquiry and skills-based approach to learning and teaching remains, I think, powerfully relevant today, and perhaps even more so in 2022 than it was 17 years ago when we first started it. We ran the programme training all the teachers in each of the schools for a 2 or 3 year period, and we did this for 12 years, and many of those schools are still doing it. And for me, the true success was when a school absorbed it to such an extent that they made it their own. They didn't even call it Open Futures any longer. It just became what they do. And I'm going to hand over now to a school in Hull who will tell you a little bit more about the programme.
Many of these children have parents in either very low-paid jobs with very few aspirations, or they're unemployed. Many of them are second, third generation unemployed. We need to break that cycle.
That is not something that I normally do every day, really. It felt really like I was a farmer trying to dig up my crops to sell to the supermarkets for advice for growing potatoes. water them regularly, check them regularly, be careful so you don't stab the potatoes. Just dig a little bit, pull them up. If they aren't in there, dig like further down where you planted them.
Can you stop what you're doing and look at this? Can you see how the seed potatoes sent out all the little plants?
Oh yeah, because there's one growing there.
There's one growing there, there's one growing there, there's one growing there. So where do they make their food?
Leaves.
In the leaves, that's right. Can anybody remember?
Photosynthesize.
Photosynthesize. Well done, Evan. Thank you very much.
So if you want to try something out, something new, you should do filming, because it's like you see stuff in a different view, not focusing on loads of things, just like focusing on one thing. It's fun.
Is it lemongrass?
No, it's chives.
Chives.
Grow it and cook it fit into the curriculum in so many different ways. They bring it to life and give learning a context. The children bring their mathematical and scientific skills into what they see as fun.
1 tablespoon of honey, ground black pepper, 450 grams new potato cooked half, 8 radishes thinly sliced.
Well, I think what else is important to wash your hands before you cook, because your hands might be dirty and germs all over your hands.
So your fingers mustn't be going towards the knife, they need to be facing away from you. And then...
Be careful and be safe.
Good girl.
Don't go near the pan too much, because it might get hot, and when you touch it, then burn your hands. When I grow up, I would like to be a teacher or cooking artist.
What I want you to do, I want you to think about the ideas that you get from watching that excerpt. Stephanie?
People that are bored of like just having gruel all the time, they want like food.
Boredom.
Needing and wanting more food.
Need and want, I like that.
They want better food.
Right, it's a word beginning with H, I think you're after. Hands up, please, yeah? Hope.
Hope means where you're thinking about something that you want to happen in the future.
You're wishing really hard for it.
Yeah, you're wishing, I like that, wishing.
When you do philosophy, you can talk about anger or anything.
Jealousy.
Yeah, it's not just like teachers and students who you can express yourself to.
Before I used to do philosophy, when I'd go to my mum and say a problem, I'd always mumble and I couldn't get the words out. But since I've been starting to do philosophy, I can go to my parents and speak it out clearly in just one sentence.
If you look in most primary schools, most teachers' first rule is don't answer back. I want children to answer back. And I've found that the Ask It sessions promote that.
When we started working with Open Futures, it was quite evident in lessons that children were engaged, were excited and interested. The children's enthusiasm has helped to drive the curriculum forward just as much as I have or the staff have. And so we are completely overhauling the curriculum, looking at the topics we teach and focusing on the 4 Open Futures strands as the drivers through.
So I hope that has started to give you a feel for the richness and the breadth of the learning that's taking place. Open Futures really enables a focus on children learning through doing. And our aim was always to place these learning strands right at the heart of the curriculum and the heart of the school development plan, never as clubs or standalone add-ons. And we'd always begin by asking schools, what do you want Open Futures to do for your school? To help encourage them to articulate their vision for it and also to take ownership right from the very start. The underpinning pedagogy provided through Ask It became the first strand to be introduced to prepare the ground, so to speak, for the skills strands. And as Roger Sutcliffe, who founded SAPRE, the UK charity for P4C, he said the problem with the old adage of learning through doing is that you can do and do and do, but if you're not reflecting and you're not asking good questions, then you may not be learning anything. And good questioning really feeds into all areas of the curriculum and all areas of learning. So by focusing on this whole school approach, a whole curriculum to the school curriculum, and really encourage joined up thinking and planning right across all the subjects and progression across all the year groups. And this led to efficiencies and often saved time. The learning strands of Ask It, Grow It, Cook It and Film It allowed children to link their education to the real world and most importantly to their own lives. And this for me is absolutely key, because what I saw was that when children understand what they are learning is important to them, then they want to learn more, and it gives them huge confidence as well. The way that the strands interact with other subjects, particularly core subjects, encourages lateral thinking and the application of skills and knowledge across all subjects. The relationships are really important. They're important in any school, but as part of this programme, it was a real catalyst for improving relationships right across the school into the wider community, and particularly for engaging with parents and carers, some of whom had had very poor experiences of schooling themselves, and they would come in not to talk about literacy, but maybe to help build the school garden or to attend a Spanish cafe for some tapas, which the children might have initiated. There were loads of different wonderful things that they did. What we found is that it connects on a very, very deep level with values held by teachers and parents, and it creates a huge range of opportunities for schools to work together, to learn from each other and to support each other in their practice. It also brought parents in, and also local businesses and experts were able to get involved and contribute to the curriculum and the children's learning. So lots of projects tend to come and go, but I have to say that Open Futures really sticks. And the reason it sticks is practically and organisationally, these things, embedding it in the school structures, etc., were really important. And we also developed a quality mark to assist schools in embedding and sustaining Open Futures and monitoring its progress as they went. So implementing the approach required physical changes to the space, and these were visible to everyone. And when parents have helped build things like the garden, for example, or a kitchen classroom, then it makes it much harder to get rid of them when there's a change of leadership, which often happens. So the range and breadth of the strands gave lots of opportunities also for staff to take ownership of particular strands, and that also in turn contributed to staff development. So the centre refers to children's agency as the capacity to act independently and make choices. And Ask It invites children to be in the driving seat. And a child said to me, "It gives me a chance to express what I want to say and people respect my views." And another one said, "I like building on other people's ideas." I mean, don't we want that from everybody we work with and our families? We want to build on other people's ideas. So the four strands all provide really genuine opportunities for children's agency and for them to exercise and recognise their own agency as learners, individuals, and also members of a community, which is both local and global. And they have a voice and an I can attitude. It really builds commitment and it builds a community with agency. It's fun and everybody loves it and everybody can achieve together. So, which step have you reached today? In summary, we really couldn't have engineered the outcomes that we saw happening, the complexity and the breadth of outcomes. And it's just a catalyst for schools, their communities, and the children within them. And it's important not only for its contribution to education, but to the health of our young people and the wider community. And the ripple effect just takes Open Futures beyond the school and gives the children the real chance to recognise that they too have agency and they can create change. And if you'd like to know more, you can visit the Open Futures website with all our resources, films, and a little potted history of how we went about it.
Lucy, thank you so much. From my point of view, food is so crucial, isn't it, to the whole ecosystems of the world, but it's also something that's pleasurable daily and wraps into health matters. And so I can't think of a more positive and important way to start. Thank you very much indeed. And by the way, can I just remind all our audience that do if questions occur to you, do use the Q&A, and then they'll get stacked up, and then I will try and moderate as many as I can to get all our panelists involved. And Tessa, I didn't mention this before, hopefully you can join us on the panel as well. So thank you, Lucy. Now we turn to Doug. Over to you, Doug.
Great. Thanks, Dominic. Okay, thanks, everyone. What I'm going to talk about in terms of my sort of presentation is to talk about some from my own perspective about how I see pedagogy of hope from a context of a process of global social justice, and then relate that to discussions around climate change and how that relates to education issues regarding young people. And I think one of the things I wanted to say, really to start things off, that my perspective that coming to this whole area is that I come from a perspective that talks about how we can build into our educational practice a more definable global outlook, and that within that recognizing the divisions that exist in the world and promote an approach towards learning that encourages critical reflection and belief that actually educators can play a role in social change. So some of the things that I'm particularly involved in terms of my broader work is that how we make connections between the local and the global, what happens at a local area in a school classroom, or what children's experiences, how that relates to big picture questions. In the process of discussing those areas, how do we provide approaches to learning that look at different things from issues from different perspectives, and how do we underpin that with a perspective of social justice? So that's where I come from, and my work's been quite heavily influenced recently by the Sustainable Development Goals, and particularly target 4.7 of those goals, which all governments in the world have signed up to, and which I think is quite important in the context of what we're talking about today, because there's not only a reference to sustainable development, but human rights, gender equality, peace and non-violence, and global citizenship. And there's a sense in which, we're now, these themes are becoming more and more relevant, obviously, in the world we're living in today, but also become increasingly part of discussions about education at all levels. And so one of the things I've been writing about and talking about in relation to this, in relationship to what's been happening with issues in the wider world in recent years, but also reminding ourselves of that, the perspective of wanting to promote a more just world. How do we do that in a way that encourages a sense of engagement in these issues in a positive, forward-looking manner? So my approach is that when we come to discuss climate change or other matters like that, we need to promote them in a way that gives a sense of hope and that change is possible. Halpin has argued that education is essentially a future-orientated concern to bring about improvement. So I think this sense in which we think about our role as educators, that we have a responsibility as educators to promote a sense of positivity, that change and a positive future is possible. And I think that to me is my sort of starting point, so that when we come then on to look at questions of anxiety and a concern about the state of the planet, then we need to come to that from a sense of how do I promote a pedagogical approach that connects these anxieties and concerns to a sense of hope. And so I think that also means, I would suggest, going beyond some sort of emotional response to these issues to look at actually how we can engage in a process of dialogue and engagement with pupils. And I was particularly interested by Lucy's reference to initiatives like Philosophy for Children, because I think Philosophy for Children is a very good pedagogical tool for these sorts of issues. The person who's particularly influenced my thinking about how I see a pedagogy of hope is the Brazilian educationalist Paulo Freire, who talks about, to understand a sense of hope and secure and change the world, you've got to understand the current situation. So therefore, that means to me that we need, therefore, when we start talking about climate change, then we need to understand the threat the planet presents, addressing the fears that result and sharing through evidence how hope can motivate people to take action. So there's a sense in which you can't ignore the issues and questions. And one of the areas that I've felt has particularly concerned me in some of these discussions is that people talk about hope in a very abstract, emotive way without grounding discussions about hope in the real world and real situations. Henry Giroux talks about this as educated hope. And I think that's particularly relevant when we come to talk about climate change. The person who I think has written quite a lot about this area is Dave Hicks, who's talked about, the strands that needed to make hope a difference to learners. And he talks about sharing, creating spaces where people can share their feelings, listening to the views of others so they feel they can be listened to understand the nature of climate change, and to know things and forms of action and what you can actually do. And I think, to me, therefore, when we talk about addressing issues like eco-anxiety, if you come up from a pedagogical approach of one of hope, and one that's about engaging a process of learning, listening, understanding, and engaging in a process, then I think that there are ways in which that can be used in a positive way. To me, one of the two things I just wanted to raise is that quite often when we talk about some of these questions about hope, one of the things I think needs to remember to locate some of the issues and particularly children's and young people's real world experiences, that actually there's a connection to them, the connection to their own world. And one of the things I think that's quite challenging when we talk about climate change, particularly with younger children, is a sense that can be seen to be quite remote as a big picture question, and then they find examples of disasters and things that they understand as related to climate change. So I think we need to look at ways in which we can engage in those questions. I would also suggest that we need to look at the relationship of hope and hopelessness, and that goes beyond sort of individual responses, emotional individual responses, and promote a sense of dialogue and engagement through groups of children, how they can share views and ideas. And because I think sometimes there's a danger that this area can often be reduced to a very individualistic approach and a mental health issue, which is important, but I also think it needs to look at more wider questions about how the experiences can relate to broader social concerns. And I think, therefore, promoting a sense of change is possible, imagining future scenarios, and how in the process of that you can seek change towards a more just and sustainable future. So to me, in that context, the sense in which you can look at these issues through a range of perspectives and approaches is, I think, important. Sorry. And how then to want to relate this to the question of younger children. For a lot of the work that I've been involved in promoting global learning and development education within schools is that when we've looked at this approach with younger children, a very important underlying theme has that been a very strong values base around a sense of fairness, rights, and empathy and concern for the future. And I think the sense in which this values perspective, to me, needs to be very much underpinning what I would regard as a central process of a pedagogy of hope. Secondly, I think within that context, that also means promoting positive values, ways in which, through a process of engaging in these issues, there can be a sense that people feel they've got a contribution to make, and their contribution can be seen to be positive and making a difference. Thirdly, and I use this example of the work of UNICEF, who have a very interesting educational program, and they have this really interesting program called a Rights Respecting School Award program, which, although it's around children's rights, has in recent years taken quite a strong environmental dimension, where they've encouraged children and young people, when they talk about rights, also make connections to environmental questions. And I think the ways in which things like, in terms like environmental justice, can be a way of making these sorts of connections. And to me, I think when we talk about eco-anxiety and we talk about addressing things like climate change, the more that we can take it out of a very technical scientific response, not saying that's not important, but bringing in a broader social approach and purpose, I think would be valuable and helpful. And that, to me, is where I would see a lot of the conversations need to go when we talk about eco-anxiety with young people. And that's all I want to say for now. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Dominic.
Thank you, Doug. Some really profound and important philosophical, theoretical, and empirical questions I think that you're raising there. So thanks. I look forward to talking more about some of these things in the panel discussion. So next, really looking forward to hearing from Anna, who brings, of course, so far we have people who are embedded in all sorts of ways in the practices and the policies and the research in education. It's very refreshing, Anna, to have you coming, helping us think in a different way from different perspectives. And I'm sure our participants, who are, lots of them are trainee teachers and teachers themselves, I'm sure they'll be fascinated to hear. Another quick plug, please start getting your questions ready. You've got that unrivaled opportunity to ask directly some of our experts today about the questions that you raise. So Anna, over to you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm in Canada, and we have a tradition now of declaring our land, where we're speaking now just as a way of reciprocity and reconciliation for the Indigenous people who occupied it. So I'm going to start off by saying that I'm speaking to you on the traditional territory of the Adirondacks and Mississauga people. And my role as a settler, I take very importantly, and I teach that to our children. And as a form of reciprocity, we cultivate the land that we're on so that native species and trees and plants and creating habitat for all the native species here. So now that I've got, this is our now customary greeting, but I think it ties in naturally with probably what listening to the other speakers about reconnecting with the land and reinforcing that connection with the land. And as a clinician, I've been asked to talk a little bit about the health effects of climate change. This will be a brief overview because we have 10 minutes, and then I'll talk a little bit about what we see in practice and what from the medical community we would say. So, I mean, first of all, climate change, huge health issue. We're already seeing health impacted in drastic ways. Children are among the most vulnerable. It's the #1 threat to health, according to the WHO, and for many of us as well who see it. Big topic that I think is really relevant to this group would be heat. So as the climate gets hotter, obviously there's going to be some areas that are completely uninhabitable, but I think it's especially important to think about in temperate areas. I live in a place where it gets commonly over 30 degrees, so most of us have air conditioning if we can afford it. Schools do not. And in temperate areas, you can, for example, in our temperate areas on our west coast last year where Vancouver is, no one has air conditioning, it doesn't get that hot. All of a sudden 40 degrees, there was a lot of death. But thinking about it in terms of as summers and springs get hotter and children in school, can they think, can they concentrate? How are you going to deal with this? Also hot temperatures You have more visits to the emergency department. We have more hospitalizations. Children come with infectious problems, even like foot and mouth disease, breathing problems, asthma, as well as kidney problems, electrolyte disturbances, kidney stones, and many other things that we will uncover as we start to understand the relationship between heat and health. Another big area and pocket we think of as natural disasters. So whether that's drastic flooding or big rainstorms, windstorms, depending on where people are, there's an injury and loss to life that seems very intuitive, but you also have to think about what else has been destroyed. So what healthcare facilities, what access people have, what about school infrastructure and how is that affected? Access to medication, refrigeration. So people have spoiled food and they get gastrointestinal disorders. Water systems, it doesn't take much to overflow between the sewage and water systems that contaminates downstream. Are your water treatment plants up and available? That causes gastrointestinal illnesses. And then as these communities, may be evacuated and may become, as people move back or as they rebuild, the livelihoods of peoples, the agricultural system, industry, which also may have contaminated water supplies. But as all those rebuild, there's going to be so much more stress that families are dealing with. And then you're going to have mental health impacts in the children and the family, but also we have to think about vulnerability. And with that stress, you get the potential for unsafe environments for your children, which you're going to see affected as well. Allergies are going to change the pattern, the distribution as pollen seasons change, shift. You get new plants that you're not used to, and you get then sensitization or worsening of symptoms, and that ties into respiratory symptoms and asthma as well. You also have, as the ranges of vectors that bring illness like ticks and mosquitoes change, you're going to have shifts in diseases. You may see new diseases that you haven't seen before in your region, including tropical illnesses. And with all of this, we also get displacement that is either temporary, as I mentioned, or you can have more medium-term or long-term or widespread migration that we're seeing. So we're seeing climate refugees. And we as the global north, right, need to accept these people into our countries. And as you are seeing them in your schools, you're going to have increased flux of refugees. You're going to have people, so we have to make sure that we have trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive care that we're providing to our children. And all of this impacts mental health. And so you've heard a lot about eco-distress, and so I won't harp on that other than, just the knowledge of this. Our youth are actually seeing and mentioning this. So I have a colleague in downtown Toronto who sees mainly refugee and newcomer population. And when the youth come in the last 18 months, if they're coming with a mental health problem, they say two things: COVID and the climate change. Those are the two major things that are really affecting them from their words. Also, think about the acute mental health issues and communities can have when they're affected by a large event. And again, thinking about the disruption that comes with stress and climate change, I think of in an environmental, but also in a human context as a huge stressor. And again, the vulnerability of children. And even I'll go back on heat. So just being hot, there was an increase of violence in communities, and as well as exacerbation of mental health crises that is particularly for those who've already had them. And that can affect children, but it also can they can be children in homes with people that are affected. And that's all I'm going to say about health effects right now. And I can talk a full hour about the way it's affecting health, but those are the ones I wanted to touch on. But in terms of solutions, I'll think a lot about nature, right? Our connection with nature. And this is where returning to the knowledge keepers, of our land, right? This philosophy that we're all parts of the environment. And so I think just three little points that I would make is one is, I had the chance of walking with a Mohawk healer, and I asked him about this. And so in their philosophy, the earth is the mother, right? It's the creator. And he said, well, the mother's changing, the earth is changing, right? So starting from a place of acceptance, right? Climate change is real, environmental changes have happened, so accept it, right? And then we can start to think about growth and moving forward. The other piece is reciprocity. So, and drawing environmental awareness and connection to nature, not just in their outdoor time, but if you're in math, they're holding a pencil. Where is that pencil made from, and what the resources are that connect them there. And integrating it all throughout the teaching. And I think those are, and then moving that step forward from gratitude to reciprocity, right? So what can we do for the environment? And all of this leads to what we have seen. And, there's a big study in Canada as well that echoes what we've seen elsewhere. But children as young as 6 do have eco-distress. They are worried. Some activity and in the engagement environmental activity does help in terms of cultivating hope and empowerment. Absolutely, it does. But I do worry about burnout, right? Especially in young minds when they want radical transformation very quickly. So how do we support them and integrating their connection with nature and mindfulness so that they don't burn out through this? And so those, I think, I've just in those few minutes I had at the end is what I would touch on. I hope that was helpful in the context that you're in.
Very helpful, Anna. Thank you. And it was so wonderful for you to make reference to the land, Indigenous peoples. And I've been to Canada and experienced this at every event that I attended. And I think it's an incredibly powerful and visible way of, speaking about these kind of issues in a different way. I encountered a similar sense in Australia and a bit less so in North America, although I've not been recently. So, and I think actually, to be honest, it's something that we need to do more in England and other UK countries. So it's a really important reminder there. Can I ask everyone to rejoin us with video now? And I've got one, and Tessa, please, if you're feeling, lovely to see you again, and do get stuck in, as it were. Now, I've got an opening question, which I think everyone will be able to have a go at because it's suitably general. And I'm just going to look at people in the order of my screen. And so if we work in this order, I'm going to start with Doug. Doug can answer first, then Lucy, then Tessa, then Anna, because that's the way you end up jigged on my screen. And the question is, it's about Greta Thunberg, actually. And it says, does Greta Thunberg, through her emotive speeches, inspire hope for young people or inflict anxiety?
Yes, I saw that one. I think a bit of both is my response to that, and I think that's one of the challenges that we have in these areas. Now, Greta has obviously played a very important role in raising awareness and understanding of climate change issues and been a major force for putting things on the agenda. But there have been aspects of her language and how she's said, things that she's said that I think are particularly problematic when she talks about doom-laden future scenarios and so on. And she does that for political point scoring reasons. So therefore, my response to that to say is, whilst recognizing, valuing her contribution, from an educationist point of view, she always should come with a health warning, really, and to be used in a way that could engage in discussion, but also she shouldn't be the beginning and end of any discussion about it. That was my response.
We might have to get Anna to judge on the health implications, but anyway, Lucy.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think she's a campaigner and she's an extremely good one. She's leading a very effective campaign. I think, I agree with Doug that, that she is political point scoring, but with good reason, because governments are not listening and they're not acting. And one of the accusations in the survey was that they actually are lying as well about how they're addressing it. So I think in part, she's a campaigner and she has created opportunities for young people to take action, through their strikes. I think that's positive. I think one of the big problems is newspaper coverage. They're probably more responsible for hyping up the anxiety-inducing language. But again, I mean, it kind of doesn't matter who it is or what the issue is. what is missing in our education system is a space for our young people to process these things, and it needs a space, and the space needs to be part of the normal day-to-day business in a school. And my fear around climate change and adding it into the curriculum is it becomes yet another siloed topic that happens all by itself. And, you know, the kind of things that Anna was talking about, you know, where did this pencil come from? I mean, I've sat in discussions, in P4C discussions in our schools before all this, you know, when children were discussing, why do we get asparagus from Peru? You know, and where does our food come from? So, you know, I think.
Thank you, Lucy.
Yeah, I'll be quiet.
Brilliant. No, well, it's okay. I've got questions lining up. So, Tessa, over to you.
Yeah, just very quickly, I totally agree with those points. I think also that it's very important for, and this is what we're trying to encourage through the optional course that we've got on our Moodle space for our students, is around hearing different voices. So I think it's critical, just as Anna, you've said, listening to all those different, you know, listening to Indigenous voices, listening to young people, to older people, to our older generations, and so on, I think is really, really valuable. And you know, we are encouraging that provision of space. We actually run P4C sessions with the student teachers, which I think is critical. And then finally, just seeing it, just as you were saying, Lucy, around it being a very much across curricula, a very much an integrated curricula thing. It can't be just the responsibility of the geography and science specialists. This has got to be across the board, and from the very youngest, with them understanding what's going on, just as you talked about, Doug. So yeah, those, absolutely agree with those points.
Brilliant, thank you, Anna.
Just picking up from there, and then I'll end with the Greta question. So as a pediatrician, teachers are healthcare providers, and you can't separate it, right? In terms of, if you're talking about picking up neurodevelopmental, all the interventions for behavioral children, a recognition of ADHD and how you can transform a life, people coming with insecure homes, with food insecurity and food programs in schools, children in abusive homes, right? You're trained to pick these children up. And I have heard so many children who talk about how a teacher has fundamentally changed their life by giving them hope, right? And a way out. So for us, there should be way more communication across lines because that critical role teachers play. And so I just wanted to echo that. Greta, for me, I mean, especially 20 years ago, I did an environmental degree, and honestly, going into medicine was a break because I know eco-distress. Eco-distress is completely normal. It is a completely normal response to a terrible thing that we have been doing for generations to our planet, right? And it's real. Greta, there could have been a million Gretas before her, but the reason I see her, she was carried because she's carried on the worry of millions of other youth. So I think, to me, she's just a reflection of other young people. This is how you feel, and this is how they talk, and everything that she says is evidence-based and interesting and correct. And I don't think she's meant for youth. I think she inspires youth, and she inspires people to come forward. And certainly climate activists have a lot of degree of burnout and mental health issues, and we need to support them. But I agree, I think Greta has done an amazing job by getting her in the political sphere, getting adults to talk about them. Because that's the other piece that there's evidence in. Having school programs and getting kids involved in environmental issues, they bring that home, and having them do it with parents, you can actually motivate parental actions whose actions are more fixed by their political agendas and views. So I think Greta is phenomenal, but again, she's a mirror of our society, and she's taken that power that she has, and she's trying to make big change. But yes, mirroring all the other, concerns about the doom and gloom, but that's real. And I think that's where all these other interventions can come in terms of supporting longevity and how do we support children through this.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And thank you to Rory, who posed that very helpful question to get us all talking. I think the next one, Tessa, I'd like to come to you if that's all right. So this is from Hongliang Hu, who says, do we need to talk about climate anxiety and climate change to the kindergartners, the youngest learners at school? And if yes, how do we educators teach them regarding eco-anxiety and climate change?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really critical question, and I did mention at the end of my little bit there, at the youngest possible age, and I think this is somewhere where, and Doug drew on this as well, that we need to instill that understanding, and I think without that understanding, we can't have the hope, we can't have the agency, and so on. So I totally go with. Children are not too young at any age in order to start engaging with some of these issues, not in a terrifying way, of course, but in a realistic way through understanding. And I think the best way for doing that is for them to get an understanding of their local area first. And I think from Lucy and Anna, both thinking about that reconnection with nature, having small little growing areas in school that they can use, they can start seeing that reconnection, also not just from the natural world, but also from the human world. So talking with older generations, having that opportunity to do that, all of those different kind of things, I think they can then start relating that on a bigger global scale, well, more sort of national and then global scale. And I think it's from those beginning understandings of what it's like in their local area around human and natural interactions that they can start tackling some of the bigger issues. But I think it has to be very carefully done, and they have to be nurtured in that learning without instilling fear and terror, because that's not going to help.
Thank you very much. Lucy, perhaps turn to you for one here. So Kat Scott says, in the first two presentations in particular, but also less explicitly in the third presentation, the idea of hope came up a lot. I'm interested in the teacher side of this. If we want to support children to feel hopeful, do we need to also focus on teachers feeling hopeful? Does this happen in the same way as for children? i.e. can open future style approaches have the impact on staff too? And I will, for everyone, audience and panelists alike, warning you that we're 5 minutes from the formal end point, so we'll have to be efficient in our answers.
Well, I would say yes. Again, it comes back to agency and creativity and innovation. And in Open Futures, what happened was that the teachers were given permission. I hate to say this, but in a sense, us coming along and saying, would you like to get involved in this? Often the response was, oh, we've already started on that. And we just got to a point where we didn't know how to develop it. We gave permission for them to do what they wanted to do. And the focus was very much about getting the teachers planning these creative learning experiences, not handing over lesson plans of this is what you need to do. It wasn't all organized, it was co-created, and that's why it stuck. So the answer is yes, I think it's about agency as well, and in nurturing that and the relationships in the staff and yeah, because that's how it takes off.
Yeah, and the agency word is something that's dear to the heart of the Helen Hamlyn Centre for Pedagogy. I think, Doug, if I might try this next one, and you, if I may. Melissa Aurelia is raising a political point, really. You know, what is your opinion on the government's draft proposal on improving education in terms of sustainability, greening the curriculum? Now, I must confess, I'm not up to date. It could be the white paper that's promised, but I'm sure, Doug, you will have plenty of experience to draw on the way that governments do or do not, you know, engage with these issues.
Yeah, so it's been quite interesting because up until COP26, the UK government's approach to climate change issues and sustainability issues within the school curriculum have been noticeably non-existent, really, and been very little response. But then almost in the lead up to COP26 and at COP26, they launched this strategy, consultation strategy on climate change and sustainability. And I suppose that my main response to be, well, at least there is something to have a discussion about and to engage in some of the debates. There's been a lot of criticism of it because it's very, the curriculum side is very much saying that climate change is about technical questions, it's about science, and it's about geography. There's very much an emphasis on sort of reward type programs, on nature, exploring nature, important though that is. But what there isn't is any discussion around sustainability in a broader context. And one of the issues around that is because there's also reference to being very dismissive of political debates and discussions within school classrooms. So there's a sense in which there's a danger that topics like climate change and sustainability can become drawn into broader, ideological debates about what's appropriate to say and what's not appropriate to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think probably our final question will be for Anna, and we may just about squeeze another one in. Susan Durston asks, do you think that the use of language needs to be thought about seriously? Is the term eco-anxiety a way of children internalizing anxiety?
Yeah, I actually don't like the term eco-anxiety, to be honest. I like eco-distress better, because I also think that eco-anxiety pathologizes it. And it's a very normal reaction. It's a grief reaction, really. And it's about adjustment. So I don't like it. I think language is really important, but I think what's more important is the discussion around it. And I think coming from a perspective of starting with yourself, right? That honesty with children. Some of the evidence actually shows that the adults don't have the same capacity to get to the perspective as hope as the children do. And so I think starting in having very honest discussions, learning with them and letting them teach you and talk about feelings, I think, and being explicit them, help them label what they're feeling. And they might be having very visceral reactions that might manifest too as, if you are talking about nature, you're seeing something in that exposure, they might have a very visceral reaction to something that you might be able to help them identify. I think is actually most important. And again, integrating mindfulness and awareness and cultivating that emotional intelligence. Personally, I think that's where lots of this is going to end up in terms of all of our capacity, especially our children's capacity to deal with eco-distress.
Brilliant. And I do have a final question. I'm going to give you all 1 or 2 sentences on it each at most, in the order of Doug, Lucy, Tessa and Anna. But just before I get to that, I just want to, I can't address 3 other questions, just want to say to everyone what they were. There was a question about primary schools handling issues differently from secondary schools and whether they were the same or better. There was a very big question. I'd love to have a go at myself, but it'll have to be another time. Is the current education system structure in England fit for purpose in the 21st century? And then another one actually about animal conservation and whether that's an important part of this. And personally, given children often really engage with animals in all sorts of ways, I can see why that might be one of many ways to get into this. Anyway, the 2 sentences for each of you then is Kandan Iskan says, since it's not on the national curriculum, I embed a love for the environment and climate change issues in story time and through different lessons. How can I encourage other teachers who are not interested in climate change to prioritize these important discussions in their classrooms? Doug?
I would say listen to what's happening in the world, listen to children and young people about their concerns about these issues, because as all teachers have a responsibility to respond to the concerns that children and young people present.
Lucy?
Yeah, maybe invite them into one of your story sessions and see if you can facilitate a little discussion a bit similar to what Doug just suggested from the children, so they get to hear.
Tessa.
Great ideas. I would get the children to ask some questions of those teachers who are not interested in doing it, and then getting them to find out some of the answers and have that open debate. And then I think the teachers will see just how much the children want to get involved.
And Anna, because you have such a long journey home, you get the final word.
I think that it might come from their own personal awareness, right? A lot of grown-ups don't understand the implications of it. So engaging in conversations and meeting them where they're at and starting with an intro. And that's where I think nature is a really good starting point, because everyone knows you walk into a treed area, you take a deep breath. And I think bringing that to awareness and consciousness is often a very good place to start, other than the amazing suggestions that were done before.
Thank you. I want to thank our audience, particularly who I notice have really stayed with this debate from start to finish, have asked profound questions. If you like what you've heard today, then the Helen Hamlyn Centre for Pedagogy and the Helen Hamlyn Trust are engaging in these kind of issues and many others. So consider becoming an affiliate of the centre and do join us for other things in the future. And of course, to speakers and panelists and my colleagues behind the scenes, Monica, Will, and my co-director, Alice, who's been listening in today. Thank you so much. And I look forward to doing something similar another time. Thanks, everyone, and goodbye.